Asian Development Bank's 52nd annual meeting will be held in Nandi next week from the 1st till the 5th of May. With over 2,000 participants from 68 countries around the world, it's the largest gathering of the bank that provides a unique platform for dialogue on development issues and challenges faced by Asia and the Pacific. With us tonight, we have our guest, the Attorney General and the Minister for Economy, Mr. Aaiyaz Khaiyum, to discuss the significance of this meeting. Good evening and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So before we get into what the seminar will all be about, so many events that are taking place, talk to us about the meeting itself and the significance of Fiji hosting it for the first time.
Well, thank you for that. The Asian Development Bank has an annual meeting every year, as the name suggests. And this is the first time that it's come to the Pacific. It's never been held in any of the Pacific Island countries. And we have been given the honor and indeed the privilege to be able to host this annual meeting. It's held in all the different member countries throughout the world, throughout the region, I should say. And this is the first time it's come here. So it's quite significant from that perspective. It gives Fiji a huge footprint in respect of publicity, in respect of its reputation to be able to host such a large event. We've never hosted such a large international event in itself. So that in itself is a tremendous achievement. Of course, we have to ensure that we actually put our best foot forward, that we are able to tell all these people who are coming from different parts of the Asia-Pacific region, but also beyond that. We have, when we talk about the Asia-Pacific region in the sense, we go all the way up to the Central Asian countries, all the way stretching out to places like the former Soviet republics. And then we have, many financial institutions actually attend outside the region. So it's a grand opportunity for us to be able to showcase ourselves, to be able to say, look, we are able to host such events. Please, any other seminars, any other, such workshops or annual meetings, we can host it too. And I think it'll be a huge boost for the tourism sector, huge, employment opportunities, more employment opportunities in the tourism sector. So those people who are in the tourism sector are working towards this, thank you very much for your input. It's been a tremendous, logistical arrangement. We've got inbound operators that are working together with the government. We've got, of course, the police. We've got various other agencies of government, including immigration, that has to work together because, of course, there are very, high-profile ministers, etc., coming. We have the Deputy Prime Minister of Japan, who will also be attending. And we have to make sure, for example, the logistics, the security and everything is in place right down professionally. And so I think, that in itself is a great opportunity. We want everybody, all Fijians who are involved in it, right from our taxi drivers to the pubs and the cafes, the restaurants, everybody, to make sure that this is a team effort. And then, people say, great, Fiji is a great destination, let's go back there again. So that's what you call, sustainability being built into your tourism sector. It creates more jobs, if there are more people who will be coming and hosting more workshops, more conventions, then all year round we'll be able to fill in all the hotel rooms and indeed create room for more rooms to be built.
So to be able to host an event of this scale, of course, you'd need proper funding. Can you talk to us about that?
Sure. I mean, we're looking at at the moment, the Fijian government has put in about $10 million, and we've also received over $10 million or thereabouts from various donors. So we've received, for example, direct cash. The Australian government, and we're very grateful to them, has donated approximately $4 million. The New Zealand government has donated over $1 million. We have got the Reserve Bank of Fiji and various other private sector companies in Fiji that have donated in cash. There are others who have, for example, donated in kind, given, for example, various products of theirs that could be used for the conference facilities or given huge discounts. Now, in total, we're looking at approximately $21 million in cash, in kind, and of course, government's input. But the multiplier effect of it is quite significant because every person that comes to this conference pays their own way. So they, for example, will be booking rooms. If you've got 2,000 people, for example, the last count of 2,000 people registered, if you have 2,000 people and if you extrapolate that, multiply that by $350 a night, accommodation over 6 nights, you're looking at a few $1 million. Again, we've got issues at the moment that Fiji Airways has all these business class seats booked out. People are looking for making all sorts of arrangements. I was talking to somebody the other day, they were 19th on the waiting list. So, you know, that again in itself in airfares you're looking at over about $5 million. The majority of the people who will actually travel to Fiji will be traveling on Fiji Airways. And then of course, you know, people generally spend money. So even if you multiply, you know, $150 a day in meals or buying handicraft or drinks or whatever it may be, again it's a few $1,000,000. So if you have a multiplier effect of say about 1.5, you're looking at, you know, an input into the economy of about $31 million over a period of say about 6 or 7 days. So that is quite significant. And I think again, we would like to thank all the sponsors and donors. We of course are acknowledging them publicly. I don't have the list of all of them here with me, but we most certainly will be publicizing that. But again, you know, it ensures that we get an injection into the economy. It creates more jobs. It also gives our young people in particular who are working in the tourism sector the type of exposure that we need for hosting such large events. As you know that we had highlighted about 18 months ago, talking to FNPF about building a fairly large convention center, because one of the areas that Fiji misses out on is what we call the MICE market, is meetings, incentives, conventions, exhibitions. So we aren't able to host very large, functions. A few years ago, you know, when we used to go to India quite regularly for tourism expositions, they wanted to have Filmfare Awards in Fiji, Miss Femina Awards. Now we don't have the capacity to do that. We have the room inventory to be able to host such events, but we also don't have the indoor facility to be able to then get into that space. If we build a convention center with, you know, other sort of services attached to it, then we are expanding the scope of our tourism industry.
Well, there's also different sectors of the public that will be involved in this. Of course, it's not just for bankers. You've also extended invitations to civil society organizations, NGOs as well. And we'd like to discuss some of the events that will be taking place that they will be involved in. But we'll take a look at that after the break. Welcome back. Now, sir, let's take a look at one of the important events that's going to be taking place. That's on Thursday, the 2nd of May. There's going to be the host country seminar, 30 Under 30, the Faces of Fiji's Future. Now, this is going to be showcasing some of our young people who have been influential in certain areas, especially athletes, those who are in studying right now, having all these innovative ideas. Talk to us about that.
Well, you know, obviously, as you know, that Fiji has a fairly large chunk of the population below the age of 27, 50% in fact, and of course, around about 70% below the age of 40. We wanted to use this international event to showcase our young people, and I think it is very, very important to do that, to invest in our young people, to give them the level of confidence that they can participate in mainstream policy decision making, but also even prior to that, being able to understand, you know, what it is like to operate in a global economy, and how they can contribute towards that. I think that is very, very significant. So what we have done is that we held a competition. So we got what we call a 30 Under 30 competition, where people actually highlighted or showcased what they were doing in their particular area of skill set or profession. And so a group of 30 people have been chosen. Out of which a panel will be selected, and they'll be able to speak, you know, about their specific skill sets, about their views on the economy, their views on the world, how they can contribute as young people. So I think it'll be a wonderful opportunity, and of course we've got a fairly prominent person who will be a panelist, who will be hosting this particular panel session. And we urge, you know, people to come and view this. Of course, this will be, you know, live streamed. So we get people all over the world watching this. And you'll be surprised how many people actually do watch these things live streamed, and also even if it's shown later on, various programs. So ADB has got a very wide network of, you know, of people who actually listen into these programs. But it can also influence actually, you know, policy papers. And I think that's very critical. So we're very, very proud that we're able to do this, to be able to showcase our young people.
Speaking of showcasing young people, just to take a quick break from there, there's also going to be some entertaining acts happening there. The Rishi Kapoor is actually going to be performing there. You have a bunch of young kids from school who are actually going to be stepping up to an arena where they're going to be rubbing shoulders with quite influential people, showing off their skills in an entertaining manner, of course, but also learning the importance and the significance of having seminars like this.
Yeah, I mean, we have a host country reception that will be held at the Intercontinental on Friday evening, which is prior to that the governors have their meeting at the Intercon. So you can see the events are being spread over Denra and also Intercontinental. And we thought, again, when we have the host country reception, to be able to showcase Fiji. Our culture, our tradition. We, of course, have a very elaborate traditional welcome ceremony where the Honorable Prime Minister, our Prime Minister, and the President of the Asian Development Bank will speak on Friday, and that's in Denrao. And we've got the Vengaravi, we've got the whole traditional ceremony taking place, and we've gone to great lengths to actually explain everything in the English language as to what is the significance of it. And again, we'll be showcasing various Fijian products, at various stalls, etc. And then at Intercontinental, we've got the ability to also host a reception. So we've got Rishikul, High School, the Schooler Dance Awards. They provide good, source of talent. And we also have the young band called The Gang. They'll also be performing. And of course, we've got the various other entertainers. So, we want to obviously give it the Fijian flavor. But also at the same time, like you highlighted, there's very significant topics of interest. Currently, as you would have read, that there is projected to be a global slowdown. In world economy is going to slow down. And of course, it'll have an impact on the Asia-Pacific region. Already, there is significant steps being taken by some countries. Some countries their growth have already slowed down quite significantly. They expect it to slow down even further next year. So the issue then is, of course, what will happen to the Pacific, from our perspective, purely from our perspective. What will be the impact of the global slowdown on the Pacific region, and what mitigating steps are we taking? As you know that, notwithstanding the fact that we had the global financial crisis a few years back, the Fijian economy, because of various policy measures we took in place, some were critical of it at that point in time, but the fact of the matter is when we did take those steps, it was in anticipation of what was going to happen. So it's better to actually, put in place measures so you don't get actually burnt by the meltdown, by the slowdown of the economy. So I think the fact that there's actually a session on that, and you'll have, experts talking, and so it's a good opportunity for people to come and learn. Anybody can come and register, but of course, you have to go there with the motivation to be, wanting to be able to participate in a meaningful manner.
There's also a side event that's going to be taking place on Thursday. It's Pacific Priorities and Private Sector Solutions. This is, of course, just by invitation. It's not for anyone who's going to be attending. It aims to encourage open dialogue between the governments of the Pacific and also members of the Australian and American private sectors to sort of get dialogue flowing on what could be done to sort of expand on projects that are happening in the country that the private sector can be involved in.
Most of the governments in the world cannot do everything on their own. You do need private sector participation. If you look at R&D, research and development, many of the private sector companies are the ones who actually provide innovation. We have individual innovations that do come up, but most of the larger companies or corporates actually put a lot of money into R&D. So whether it's coming up with, a new type of battery that can store solar energy for longer periods of time, whether it's, cars that may run on air, whatever the case may be. So we need to be able to, as governments, work together with the private sector. Similarly in Fiji, in a smaller sense, we need to be able to participate with the private sector, or at a regional level too. Of course, for us, the main issue is in respect of adaptation to climate change, because as we've always said in international forums, that when you actually talk about development finance, you're talking about climate finance. For us, they're synonymous. You cannot segregate them. So again, in that space, we need innovation, we need private sector participation, we need private sector discipline in respect of sort of, building in more capacity as far as mitigation is concerned, including adaptation, in our case adaptation. But I think what is also critically important is for the private sector to also understand, if you are talking about climate change, that there are various opportunities for them too. Climate change is not some amorphous idea that's run by a few people. Now, in fact, there's commercial sense to be able to, invest in particular in mitigation, but also adaptation. So we are trying to come up with creative ideas. So Fiji's, green bond issue, for example, fundamentally is trying to get private sector participation in the climate change space. So when we raise funds from the green bonds, we're able to use those funds then to, target, for example, building resilience in our infrastructure.
Let's put a pin in this and explore this further in the next segment. Welcome back. Now, there's going to be a very important event that's going to be taking place, and this is at around 12:30 p.m. This is the Civil Society Program, which is the impact of ADB's energy policy and the Paris Agreement. This did become a bit of a contentious point earlier on last year. Quite a lot of people talking about Fiji and, whether or not we are actually conforming to the Paris Agreement and whatnot, and whether we'd need funding for all of this. Could you talk to us about that?
I didn't know there was an issue.
Well, it's in smaller circles in the build-up to the elections. So those
well, I think those people perhaps are ignorant of what is actually happening. The reality, of course, is ADB has been focused on trying to fund projects both in the private sector and also through governments in reducing the dependency on fossil fuel, first of all. Secondly, of course, by encouraging private sector to get into energy, the energy sector, and that is, through what we call the independent power producers. So people sort of invest funds in the energy sector. So whether they may get into the solar space or wind energy, and then be able to say sell to the grid, whoever owns the grid. So they do provide funding in that space. But also we've been working with them, in the energy efficiency sector. So there is we've had some discussions recently, and there's been a couple of papers written. For example, getting electric buses. Now, if you get electric buses, obviously you get cleaner energy being used. You have less carbon footprint, and obviously overall is very good for the environment. But there are many issues that you need to deal with in respect of, say, the pricing of it, the funding for the purchasing of it, and of course whether electric buses can run everywhere. So, for example, some of the rural roads, it may not be able to operate, but it may operate, for example, in all the urban centers. So there is aspects to it. One is the actual production of energy itself. The other one is actually reaching energy efficiency. So we've been working on them, and I think this will be quite a good opportunity for those who are invited to this to be able to discuss and how organizations like ADB, and of course recently we were at World Bank, and how they're also working towards achieving the outcomes or the stated objectives of the Paris Agreement.
Well, on the 3rd of April, it was stated that the ADB had endorsed a new country partnership strategy, the CPS, with Fiji for 2019 through to 2023. And under the new strategic partnership, ADB will be scaling up its support to Fiji with an estimated $600 million over the next 5 years to support the country's development agenda. And on another note, FBC News had also noted earlier in the week that the ADB had also approved an umbrella facility of up to $100 million, which would provide financing support, including loans and guarantees, and also letters of credit to overcome constraints to private sector investment in renewable power projects in the Pacific Islands. Could you give us your comments on that?
No, I mean, obviously it is welcome, and I think the ADB does recognize, together with some of the other multilateral development banks, that there is a need to get a lot of traction in this space. And we have been saying this for the past number of years. That in particular, in countries like in the region, where you do not necessarily, the larger sort of companies do not necessarily what they see economies of scale. So, we don't have like hundreds of millions of people living in this region. We don't have, tens of millions of people at one point in time demanding for electricity, because normally when you have the volume, when you have the scale, then private sector likes to come in very quickly to invest. I mean, if you look at the entire population of the Southern Pacific, if you add Papua New Guinea, which is about $7 or $8 million, we're only about 7 or 8 million people. We only 10 million people. If you take out Papua New Guinea, we're only about 2 million. Now, that's not even the size of half a suburb in, say, India or some other large city or large country. So the economies of scale aren't there. But I think the multinational development banks have now come into this space, recognizing the need for that. And of course, this type of initiative by them for the region is welcome. And you'll see that on Wednesday itself, next week, we've got a whole session with all the Pacific finance ministers or economy ministers, where we're having a gathering specifically for us, as we normally do, before the actual official opening. So again, that'll help us refocus on some of the key areas that we find that could be addressed by the ADB.
That's a partners event, but you also happen to have a civil society panel that's going to be having a resilient approach to climate action meeting that's going to be happening. This has been organized by the Pacific Islands Association of Non-Government Organizations, which is PIANGO, and this seems like something that those of us living here in the Pacific need to actually have a voice or have a say in. What would you say to those who are currently considering registering to attend this event?
Well, they should. I mean, they should attend. I mean, the fact of the matter is that ADB has always, like the World Bank and various other organizations, they always have a particular session available for civil society to participate in. In this particular case, you have one particular session, but there's another one where there's a civil society gathering that ADB is organizing, which is looking at the impact of ADB's development programs in the Pacific region. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding. Of course, some of it is spread by politicians who may be quite ignorant of things, and I would suggest to them that they can come and register and perhaps learn from these sessions, and they'll get a full sort of in-depth knowledge about these sorts of programs that are being run and what we want to do with it.
We're also going to be adding our own local flavor to this particular seminar. Instead of just having a very structured meeting, there's also going to be a Talanoa opening reception, which is a civil society program taking place from 5 to 6 p.m. And this is going to be something unique for those who have never experienced the local culture of using the Talanoa dialogues. Of course, this was successful during COP23. And what do you think that those attending this particular session can expect?
Well, I think the culture of Talanoa is actually already now spread quite. It's permeated through the international fora now, because Talanoa did not end with the ending of COP23. As you know, that through the COP23 process, we now have had our climate champion and various other people who have actually spread the culture of Talanoa, and we're continuously working on the Talanoa session. And in fact, you'll see, soon some announcements made in that respect. And so it's not something that started in COP23 and ended there and now picking up again. It's been a continuous process. So again, as the Talanoa principle has been enunciated by Fiji, is that it's not a sort of finger-pointing exercise. It's more about dialogue. It's about understanding. It's about listening and coming up with solutions that is based on, having informed decisions being made.
Thank you for that. We'll be back with more in the next segment. Welcome back. Now, so let's look at one of the important events that's going to be taking place on Saturday, rather. This is going to be the CNBC debate. This is something that is quite phenomenal. We've never had this happen in the country before.
Yeah, we have the CNBC host, Drury. I think that's the surname of the lady. She's been in sort of financial area for about reporting financial areas in about for 15 years. She'll be the host. We've got a few people on the panel. The president of the ADB, we have a representative from Philippines, from India, and we'll be there on the panel too. And again, it's talking about it's called navigating global uncertainties in Asia Pacific, lessons from tourism, technology, and trade. It's got a viewership of about 80 million people. I mean, you cannot buy this kind of publicity. So, you know, again, CNBC will be in Fiji, will be having this recorded. They'll have only their cameras will be allowed, and they, of course, then they show it throughout the world. It's got a global footprint. It's a great opportunity for us to be able to talk, of course, about the challenges. And again, it helps us to highlight Fiji. And then after that, we have got another Governors Roundtable, which is hosted by a well-known former BBC journalist, Zainab Badawi. And again, last year, just to give an example, when we were in the Philippines, we were on the panel too. We had the Deputy Prime Minister of Japan. We had the Finance Minister from Indonesia. We had the Finance Minister from Philippines. And we had another well-known person from one of the European countries. The name escapes me, or the title. So, again, that's another footprint, and that's live streamed again. So, Saturday will be very important for us in terms of highlighting where we are at, being able to publicize ourselves, but also to talk about the various challenges. I mean, the reality of the matter is that, the challenges that Fiji faces is not something that's peculiar only to Fiji, or it's, we're an isolated case. There are many other countries in the world that actually have similar circumstances or similar challenges. In fact, with, as the title suggests, with the CNBC one, everybody's now anticipating a global slowdown. So, what do we do as a region? What do we do as a country to be able to mitigate the slowdown? Of course, some people are affected almost immediately and very adversely. Some probably a bit more muted, and others, of course, the smaller ones have absolutely no control over it. So, what do we do with it? And I think, again, talking about it domestically, it'd be good for the politicians to understand this. Hopefully they want to understand it. It'd be good for local businesses to understand this. Good for ordinary citizens to understand this. And because we need to come together as a nation to be able to stand up and have some form of fortitude towards this global phenomena, because the reality is because of globalization. And globalization is not necessarily a new phenomena, but we're now a lot more intricately weaved into each other. So, I'll give you a case in point. 51% of all our tourists come from Australia. If the economic slowdown has a huge impact in Australia, you can anticipate less tourists coming from Australia to Fiji. Now, what does that mean? It means that less room occupancy. It means less revenue for government from taxes, etc. It means perhaps that the hotels may say to staff, look, we don't necessarily need you to come to work because we've got less people. So the casuals may be the first ones to ask to stay home. So, but what can we do? It's not all doomsday. So what can we do as a country? What can we do as a government to be able to stop that from happening? This is why we've been talking about looking for other source markets. Not be only dependent on one or two countries. It's great that we've got so many Australian companies. We want them to come. We want the numbers to come or continue to grow. But we want our percentage of dependency to reduce. So it'd be nice to have, for example, a 25% dependency on Australia, but still have the same numbers. But have, India, China, Europe, Middle East, North America, have that risk spread across. That's what we've been continuously saying. And this is why, we need to ensure that Fiji Airways does well. Because Fiji Airways actually is our link, is the carrier that will break into new markets. You don't expect foreign aircraft to break into new markets for Fiji. Only a Fijian airline can do that for you. So we know Fiji is now flying to Narita, it's flying to Singapore, it's flying to San Francisco. So can Fiji Airways, for example, fly to another new destinations? When they fly to new destinations, hopefully they bring in new sources of tourism numbers. That's what we need to come together and think about as a country. And I think it's critically important, and I'd like to say to those people who use this opportunity, please do not think narrowly. We need to come together, and we need to be able to overcome this global phenomena, which is not our doing, not our making, but we'll feel the effects of it. But we can overcome it, and in fact we can triumph over it if we work together as a nation, and it's very, very critical.
Just to bring it back to a couple of days before that, there's also going to be a joint seminar with the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. This is regarding debt sustainability and whether it's a cause for concern. There have been, little pockets of unrest around the country talking about, we as a small developing nation, we're taking too much debt and it's not sustainable, even though we have had, positive growth in the country for many, many years now.
I don't know which pockets of unrest you're talking about, unless you're talking about people who are talking about debt and not knowing about debt. Our debt to GDP ratio has now come down to about 46%, and it's a very good position compared to many other countries. If you look at the debt to GDP ratio of many other Pacific Island countries, quite high, a lot higher than ours. Notwithstanding the fact that the nominal debt is about $5.6 billion. So again, as we've highlighted previously, a lot of people don't understand the difference between the nominal value or the actual dollar value of the debt and as a percentage of the GDP. But IMF, of course, holds its seminars not for Fiji specifically. There are many Asian countries that are running into problems. And we have always said that our policy is a downward trajectory on the debt as a percent of GDP. And we can see that happening now, of course, over the past number of years. We've had, things like cyclones, Winston, cost us an additional $500 million. I mean, on one hand, the same people who may talk about debt want the schools to be built within 2 months or 2 days. But it costs money. It costs money to, for example, rebuild Irish crossings, bridges, jetties, schools, put up electrical cables, all of those sorts of things. And this is one of the issues that the Honourable Prime Minister has also been able to highlight internationally through COP23 about the need to invest in adaptation and the vulnerability of countries, not just Fiji, but in the Caribbean, in the Pacific, in the Indian Ocean, and even in large countries like Bangladesh, that climatic conditions actually have an enormous impact. We have countries, for example, landlocked countries in Africa that are not affected by rising seawaters because they're nowhere near the ocean, but they're affected by droughts, phenomenal changes in weather, so crops aren't being planted at the right time, or if they do get planted at the right time or the old right time, now they cannot actually be harvested. Enormous changes are taking place. So it does have an impact on the ability to, for example, fund your government projects, to be able to provide, for example, a capacity to meet your SDGs. Everybody talks about SDGs, it's cat's cry. It needs financing. So if you are a country, for example, that has been ravaged by cyclone, and you need to build money or put money into to get the basic infrastructure up, how will you be able to meet your SDGs? If you don't have your revenue sources going up, but you still need to rebuild, you will borrow more money. So how do you actually ensure that you manage your debt properly? That's what it's all about. It's about a balancing act. It's not a zero-sum game. And again, many people who are commentating in Fiji have absolutely no clue about it. They perhaps have a clue about it, some of them, but they don't want to talk about it. So I think, this seminar, of course, is these sorts of seminars are there to educate people and also to give, some of the policy makers some food for thought.
We'll be back with more in the next segment. Welcome back. Now, so this is our final segment. Before we get to how people can actually get themselves registered to attend the ADB annual meeting next week, let's take a look at something that we had touched on very lightly in the previous segment. We're talking about those who don't understand certain things, and that's where misinformation gets perpetuated and then fake news starts happening. There was an instance of that just recently. Talk to us about that.
So which
So this is, I think, on the 22nd of April. One of the television stations around the country had actually gone about misleading and misinforming the public.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's actually quite, quite amusing, frankly. And I thought Fiji TV did themselves a huge disservice. They ran a story based on some Facebook post, which was obviously fake, saying that I had in a joint press conference with the bus operators agreed to a bus fare increase. Everybody and anybody who knows anything about the bus fare, demands being placed by the bus operators knows that it's been referred to the Fijian Competition and Consumer Commission, which is, FCCC, which is an independent body. And I found it quite amazing. In fact, I was not even aware of it. Somebody sent it to me that, Fiji TV apparently ran a story saying that I had said, yes, the bus fares at the moment cost less than half a loaf, and therefore, the bus fare should be increased. Of course, any good journalist, if they should verify it. Just because something is on Facebook, you don't just pick it up. They could have at the very least rung up FCCC, ring up my number, or rung up the Department of Information saying, is this true or not? I understand they've issued, the Department of Information obviously got hold of it, and they've written to them, and Department of Information wrote to them, and then I understand Fiji TV has written a letter saying we apologize for what happened. But they have not apologized to government. They have not apologized to our office. They have not apologized to me. So I don't necessarily see it as a good apology, actually, because individuals were named, and they simply ran the story. I mean, I think the lesson to learn from this is, of course, that including your TV station, my TV station, Fiji TV, radio stations, newspapers, magazines, you need to verify the facts. It's very simple. You need to verify information. It's a basic standard of journalism. So I hope it's a lesson for everybody, and I hope it's a lesson for Fiji TV, including all the other TV stations, including all other media organizations. Please verify it, because in this day and age, of course, there's many, sources of information. A lot of it is fake, a lot of it is speculation, a lot of it is, I think quite insulting to a person's intelligence. And people simply pick it up as the gospel truth, when it isn't. And good professional standards require that. Now, hopefully that kind of nonsense will not carry on next week at ADB. It's open to the media. Anybody can go and attend. It brings us to, of course, registration. We talked about registration. There's no registration fee to attend the ADB conference. Of course, you can't attend all of the sessions. You can attend some of them that are open to the public. And we urge you to attend, and hopefully people go with the right motivation to attend.
So just to clarify, so for someone watching this at home right now, if they want to register, where can they get themselves registered?
They have to go to Denrau, and they have to go to the actual, the ADB annual meeting site. There's a registration booth, and you can register, you give all the details, and you get registered, and you'll get told which events you can go to, which is open, of course.
Thank you very much for your time, and we wish you all the best, and hopefully we do really well in next week's meeting.
Thank you.
That's all we have time for this evening. Join us again next week. Good evening.